the opening of the Forum on China-Africa Cooperation, President Xi Jinping spoke at a high-level dialogue. He said China is willing to work with Africa to forge closer relations. CGTN's Yuting has more.
Working together to strengthen cooperation in industry, trade and infrastructure to promote common and sustainable development. At Monday morning's high-level dialogue involving business representatives from China and Africa, President Xi Jinping said African entrepreneurs to welcome to come to China to do business. He also encouraged the Chinese investment in Africa. This year marks the 40th anniversary of China's reform and opening up policy. President Xi Jinping said after 4 decades of development, China had become the world's second largest economy. He added that Africa had a similar outlook to China and that Beijing wanted to present their special bilateral relationship as a role model for South-South cooperation. South African President Cyril Ramaphosa also spoke highly of China's contribution to African development in sectors such as manufacturing, agriculture and healthcare, and said the continent was new looking for further cooperation in green energy and in the fourth industrial revolution. Many business representatives at the dialogue agree that China has a plan to help the continent with industrialization, food security, public health and disease prevention.
This year's forum advocates the concepts of openness, cooperativeness, win-win and inclusiveness. It is particularly inspiring for entrepreneurs like me who have been doing business in Africa for 10 years.
We're seeing China coming back to Africa, but very differently. When the West came to Africa, they developed a lot of the infrastructure leading out of Africa. But what we're seeing China coming in and working with African governments is leading infrastructure to inside the inland of Africa. So that really creates a different type of economic development, because then we're starting to see connectivity within the African countries that hasn't been there for many, many years. So this is very interesting to see how then are we going to do trade with China and Africa, but within also African countries. And so this meeting becomes very, very important on how Africa can also trade among themselves and do investments, but also how they can work with China to really improve their infrastructure, which has been a real problem in Africa for many years.
3 years after President Xi Jinping has outlined his 10 major cooperation plans, during the 2015 Johannesburg summit, Africa has become an important destination for Chinese investment, and China has become Africa's largest trading partner for 9 consecutive years. Just as what President Xi Jinping has emphasized, and many African leaders agreed, that China has never attached any political conditions to its assistance, nor does it has constrained or interfere in domestic affairs of African countries. And it's believed that with more efforts from both Chinese and African entrepreneurs, the FOCAC summit will be a new starting point for closer trade and business ties between the two sides. Yuting, CGTN, Beijing.
And to get more insight on this, we're joined in our Johannesburg studios by Bongane Gasela, a researcher at the Confucius Institute at the University of Johannesburg. Thank you, Bongane, for joining us. What is your reaction to this speech by President Xi Jinping at the opening ceremony of FOCAC?
May you please repeat the question?
Bongane, what is your reaction to President Xi Jinping's speech at the opening ceremony of FOCAC?
Thank you for having me on the program. I think this year's summit will be business as usual, and we're expecting a lot from China after a very successful pledge from the Johannesburg summit that ran from 2015 to 2018. We have seen 90% of the projects being done, and some are still underway. We're expecting a lot from that. And we also expect our leaders to bring together China's One Belt and Road Initiative and Africa's Agenda 2063, which seeks to tackle poverty, inequality, and unemployment.
So what are the key priority areas that African leaders in Beijing should focus on in their engagement with China at the Beijing summit?
That's a very good question, but equally important, we should look at what's going on right now with the unfolding trade war between China and America. And there's been a lot of talk saying Africa is to lose a lot from this trade war, but I think we can use this to draw positive results from it. I mean, America exports a lot of agricultural products to China, and Africa can step into that, given that we have a vast of semi-arable and arable land in Africa.
And how can the ties between China and Africa be enhanced to realize the vision of a win-win partnership?
May I please repeat the question?
How can China and Africa enhance their ties to realize a vision of win-win partnership?
This takes me back to the One Belt, One Road initiative. I think Africa should utilize this opportunity and not only use the Belt and Road initiative for the transportation of our minerals, but it could be a two-way traffic where we also send our manufactured products to China. I mean, we can also go beyond economic, and we can also include people-to-people exchange. We have seen in China, here in Africa, for example, the proliferation of Chinese Confucius Institute. We can also do the same to advance and promote Pan-Africanism in Africa, in China, I mean.
All right, Bongane, thank you very much for joining us.